Welcome to the Digital Culture Podcast, a podcast for people working in the creative and cultural sector and want to know more about digital. I'm your host, James Akers. Hello, and thanks for joining us for this episode of the Digital Culture Podcast. We're continuing to interview winners of the Digital Culture Awards over the next few episodes. I'm James, one of the tech champions of the Digital Culture Network. I'm a white man with brown hair wearing a teal t-shirt. Today I'm interviewing the winner of the Using Data Award, chosen by Katie Rains, the founder and CEO of Indigo Limited. To talk about the winning project, my guest today is Simon Glenister from Noise Solution.
Hi there, my name's Simon Glenister. I'm the CEO founder of Noise Solution. White man, grey hair, big beard, sitting here in my check shirt in my office. I've run Noise Solution for 16 years now, and I'm really looking forward to a chance to talk about how much data plays a part in our world.
So you won the award for the work that you do at Noise Solution. Can you explain what Noise Solution is and the role that data plays in the delivery of your activity and everything around that?
So Noise Solution's essentially at its heart a mentoring program. It's quite a specialist provision. It does one-to-one work with young people in the community who are often quite marginalized, young people who are excluded from education, young people who are struggling with mental health, anxiety, depression, and they're often young people that services around them are struggling to engage. And what we do is pair them with a music producer to give them something alongside which to build a relationship with that person. That's actually what we're trying to do. But the modality, if you like, is music technology. So we're teaching them to make beats. We're teaching them to make hip hop, drum and bass, grime, drill music. But the point is not that necessarily. It's the relationship they build with the musician that they're working with, because academic literatures around mental health, clinical mental health and education tell us clearly that relationships are actually the number one significant indicator of success in any kind of intervention. And because of that, as well as building that relationship in the room, what we've also done is essentially within our CRM, our customer relationship manager, within that we've built our own social media platform that's private to us, which means every one of those individual young people has a secure private feed that looks like a social media feed, where from within the face-to-face sessions with their musician, they can capture all of the highlights and post like they would on an Instagram or a Facebook feed. And they can securely, privately invite in their parents, their carers, their social workers, their mental health workers, whoever the significant adults are. So all of those people can be part of and witness and contribute through liking and commenting to that young person's story as they progress through a mentoring program with Noise Solution. We have different levels of intervention depending on the level of need of the young person, but essentially that's the process. It's about creating a space where young people are in control of something for a change, actually, where everything is strength-based, where they're making choices about what they create, where there's no pressures around curriculums or learning goals, where they control what's captured, who it's shared with, where they establish a sense of being good at something, a sense of competence, where we role model what success looks like for them again, and in a way that they are seen doing that by whoever they've identified as the significant adults in their lives. That is the process.
And I imagine it's gone through various iterations over time. So how did it start off? And then what was the journey to get to where you are now?
So in 2009, when I set it up, I'd come from both a career as a professional musician. So I was the drummer in a band called Tongue, which I did a lot of international touring, major festivals, Glastonbury, Reading, Festival, all of that kind of stuff. And with a real interest in music technology. But also, at the same time, I'd started off doing youth work, started originally in a youth offending team in East London, and then progressed to doing other youth work one-to-one with young people, and then really wanted to bring the two things together. But the organisations I was in didn't quite get that vision. So it was kind of left to me to actually just do it and set it up. So I set that up, as I say, 2009. It is a social enterprise. So I was always really clear that we had to be able to demonstrate the outcomes of the work that we were doing to whoever it was that was going to be paying for that work. So outcomes and analysis of what we were doing was always a driver. And I was trying to work out at that point in 2009, okay, how can I demonstrate and also connect up the people around the young person? Because what I'd learned as a sort of professional key worker was that unless you capture and leverage the sort of thoughts and words of the really important people to that young person around them, then, you know, as a professional, you're a long way down the line to be able to influence change. You have to bring other people on board holistically around them as well, and they have to see it. And I was trying to work out right at the beginning of Noise Solution's journey, how can I do that? And at the same time, I was also really interested in blogging as well. Lots of people were experimenting with that around about that time. And I thought, okay, this is great. What I'll do is I'll just start blogging the highlights of each session. So I started using Tumblr. I cringe about it now, thinking, oh my God, how did I get away with that? But it was secure. We were password protecting it and all of those kind of things. We did think about it. But what became really clear and really apparent really early on was what we were doing wasn't just capturing what was going on. The process of capturing and sharing that with their family or their key workers and them seeing it was actually part of why we were getting the outcomes that we were seeing. It very quickly became not just a thing to capture what happened, but a part of why what we were doing was working.
What stuck out to me when I was reading through the application of the award is the ability to have wellbeing data fed through everything you do. I thought it was incredibly exciting and interesting from my point of view.
So in 2016, we were, as an organization thinking we were getting all these amazing results, but we had real trouble translating why to an audience of commissioners. We were suffering from that perennial issue of people going, oh, it's a nice arts project, but how do you demonstrate the outcomes? So we had to start thinking about finding ways to communicate to commissioners why we were having the impact we were having in ways that they understood, and using things like validated wellbeing scales seemed like an obvious place to start. So we started collecting those in 2015, I think, and we had an independent study done that showed that we were statistically significant in our impact on wellbeing, which was really exciting. We could go to commissioners and say, in your language, look, we've removed the element of chance. This thing is improving well-being, but it was on a very small scale. In 2016, I was invited to go and do a 2-year research master's at Cambridge at the university with Professor Pam Bernard, looking at methodologies around being able to demonstrate outcomes. And that well-being work using that national validated scale was very much a part of that. And in immersing myself in that sort of statistical analysis world, which was way out of my comfort zone. It took me 2 goes to get my GCSE maths. This was not my natural world, but it was really interesting once I started getting into it from that perspective. So understanding these processes and then taking all of that statistical analysis work and building it into, at that point, the platform we were building to do everything. One platform to rule them all. Because when I was talking about that Tumblr world where we were doing that, we had these stories on Tumblr and I was collecting this well-being data in Excel spreadsheets and formulating that. And there was another platform over here for this bit of data for the organization and another one over here. It was chaos. And the amount of hours that it took to bring all that data together was massive. At that point, our operations director came on board about 2015, 16. And then we took all of those processes and all of the work that I'd done in the research masters and basically rolled it into one platform using Salesforce so that everything the organization does, from our theory of change to safeguarding to contract management to these digital stories to the analysis of the well-being data, qualitative, quantitative, contract management, all of it sits in one digital cloud-based space. We talk about it as our universal bucket of truth. Everything sits in the same space, which means everything is reportable. It's about a data strategy that is scalable, that gives you oversight of everything that's happening across the organization, that is reportable, because invariably when you're talking to audiences, whether they're commissioners or funders or whoever it might be, they all have different agendas about the things that they're interested in. Some people are interested in stories. Some people want numbers. Some people want cash. So for us, the sort of groundwork done by the research masters allowed us to look at and create versions of all of those types of evidence that were methodologically grounded and evidenced. And the digital work allowed us to operationalize it all in ways that would allow us to build further. That's been incredibly useful for us for a whole bunch of reasons, not least because by the time AI rocks along, suddenly we've already done all the hard foundational work, because AI is quite easy if you have everything organized and available and secure within an infrastructure. It's just the sprinkling on the top. The hard bit is the foundational work you have to do around the data strategy.
And someone listening might think that's a lot of sensitive data going into one system, that central source of truth. Are there steps you've gone to make sure that it's secure? Do you have any advice for anyone trying to replicate something like that?
Yeah, obviously ethics are at the heart of everything we do. We're a social organization. That's what we're trying to do. Salesforce as a platform is the one we chose to go with. So anybody with access to that has to go through a two-factor authorization process to even get anywhere near it. Everything is behind such a secure infrastructure. If you think about it, Salesforce is, I think, the world's largest CRM. It's used by the top 300-400 companies in the world. The level of security that has to have to be operational, to maintain that position, is enormous. Nothing's invulnerable, right? So when I talk about having built our own social media platform within our CRM, that means that all of that data is secure as well. We have pixel level control over what information is displayed across the whole organization. So yeah, the security concerns are not that massive. The ethical concerns around capturing that data, yeah, we could talk for a long time about those. But again, it's something obviously we take incredibly seriously. And then additionally, you have the layer of AI over the top of that.
To have that level of control, you'd assume you'd need hundreds of people in a team on it all the time, loads of really technical people. Is that the case? How big is your organization?
It's tiny. So Noise Solution has a core staff of 6 now, and about 30 musicians. We've built our instance of Salesforce, that CRM, to automate huge swathes of our day-to-day operation. We've thought about the whole thing, conceptualized that whole infrastructure to only tell us when things are going wrong, rather than just focusing on the things that are going right, which I think is actually what most people do because they like that confirmation bias. We focused on it reporting only where things aren't happening that we expect to happen, which completely inverses it and means that we're able to see immediately on a daily basis things when attendances aren't what they should be, or whether reaction times to getting a referral set up aren't happening in the expected timeframe. And that makes it incredibly efficient. So we are currently delivering around plus 700 hours a month of one-to-one mentoring across 6 counties in the community. And we have complete oversight of that through the CRM of every session that happens. And there's an automated process of keeping all of the stakeholders within each young person's digital story informed at every stage of what's going on, automated notifications, all of that kind of stuff. So people feel secure and held in their journey as they go through it, and they have opportunities to communicate with us, and we have opportunities to see what's happening in every session, which just means that we are able to identify those weak points almost immediately. So for instance, as an example, at the end of every session within the platform, the musician writes a short report about their session, about what happened, not necessarily the fact that they learned to play a C chord or a G chord, but about how that young person felt about the process, or any flags or any safeguarding concerns that they might have. That report is automatically copied to their key worker who referred the young person, the social worker or the mental health worker. So there's open lines of communication. But also the senior leadership team, Noise Solution, also get every morning an email, every report from the sessions the day before with a link into their story and a link into their record. You can, at a glance, see exactly what's happened all over the east of England the day before and be on top of everything. So we're constantly in contact with musicians when things are coming up. So it's a continual assessment of how things are going, because these are very complicated young people dealing with very complicated situations. So yeah, that element of communication is really vital. There's no way we'd be able to do 700 hours a month if a vast proportion of that was not an automated process within the CRM.
And some organizations I speak to really struggle to get their staff on board with using the CRM system, to know the importance of it and the outcomes. So how have you done it so successfully?
I think it's a culture thing. I think every musician that works with us, and they're freelancers, right? Work in the community, often a little bit isolated, frankly, working with young people in quite tricky circumstances, but they have access to that young person's digital story and they go through it with that young person. They see the social worker or the aunt or the mum or the dad or the carer going, oh my God, this is amazing. They are having that mirrored back at them. The young person's having it mirrored back at them, and that's really significant. But the musician as well is seeing the impact and the conversations change around the young person. We are constantly collecting data, both qualitatively and quantitatively, on the impact. We constantly feed that back to the musicians as well and applaud. And isn't this amazing? We collect so much unsolicited, volunteered impact data that we're currently running a social media campaign where we're publishing one piece of transformative feedback received a day for a year. 365 young people or parents or social workers or mental health workers feeding back to us in an unsolicited way. This is amazing. You've had this impact or that impact. And we constantly try to keep the musicians that we're working with in that loop. They are an integral part of that process. So the more you get them to value the collection of the data and the results of the impact that they've had, the more likely they are to buy in. I think actually a real significant issue for the art sector, for the third sector, is that so often they're asked to collect data by various multiple funders, all with their individual agendas, that those people don't trust the collection of that data. Oh, I've got to collect this for somebody over here, right? But how often do you hear that as a complaint? Whereas our musicians are like, okay, yeah, no, I get why I'm doing this. I'm tracking wellbeing because we're really interested as an organization in how people feel when we do this work around music with them. And it has an impact on how the organization can present its argument to those funding organizations. It's about getting that kind of level of buy-in, but doing it in different ways. Numbers, money, stories, mixed methods of approach. None of any one of them is a definitive way of demonstrating outcomes, but collectively together, showing trends in all three of those areas, that's a very compelling argument, both for the musicians and commissioners as well.
And you've got a great data structure. You've got a great data culture. And you mentioned earlier on the sprinkling on top of artificial intelligence.
Sit down, take a breath. Imagine a world where we didn't have to use feedback forms. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Utopia, right? So essentially, feedback forms are an awful, dreadful way to collect data. If you think about how your body feels when somebody says, I'm going to give you a feedback form, I know how mine feels, and it's just, I tense up and I go, I just don't do them almost as a point of principle anymore. But feedback is really important. Because of all those reasons I've just mentioned, feedback forms are a terrible way of collecting data. People are apologetic about them. I'll give you an example. I did a piece of quite long-term work with the School for Social Enterprise, where for a year we worked on something called the Scale Up program, really impactful, a chance to come together with other leaders from the third sector. And at the end of the program, we all sat around in a circle and the facilitator said, talk to me about what the impacts of that year's work were. And it was beautiful. And there was story after story of redemption and tears and laughter. And it was beautiful. And you could palpably feel the impact that had. And then he said, now fill out a feedback form. And everyone went, was all right. Because they wanted to get out of the room. Nobody wants to do that. So with all of that in mind, we've already instituted a culture and have done from day one since 2009, that every young person at the end of every session has a conversation about what's working and what's not working and how it makes them feel. We call them reflection videos. The reason we do that is, started off to capture what was happening. But again, that process of them talking and externalizing those thoughts and feelings has an impact on them. Additionally, it's projected onto the screens of the parent, the carer, the social worker. It has an impact on them. But as a side benefit to the organization, it also means that of those 700 hours a month of delivery that we're doing, within which each young person is talking for 3 to 5 minutes about how that session made them feel and think, in conversation, not feedback forms, it is littered with gold dust, qualitative data, that's where all sorts of unexpected things come up. And so we've long realized, long before ChatGPT came along, that what we really wanted to do was to be able to get at that information. Like, how do we get at that data? We've nailed the quantitative data, the wellbeing data. We're already collecting that and analyzing it and benchmarking it against national data sets automatically and looking at statistical significance and blah, 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 blah. We can do that. Getting at the qualitative data, the story data, that's really, really hard. So about 6 years ago, we got a developer over and paid him in beer and pizza to create a word cloud from that data. Again, because everything's within Salesforce. And it was all right. It was interesting. But from those sort of lowly beginnings, we've been thinking about this, as I say, for a long time, way before ChatGPT came along. And then it did. And it was like, okay, here we go. This is really interesting. How can we do this? And so we got more developers on board, having built very close relationships with them. And essentially what we are now able to do is take our understanding of how noise solution works and why it works, which is based in our theory of change. Something else I think organizations need to actually buy into a little bit more. So this understanding of how we had impact arose out of that academic research I did. All of our work is filtered through a theoretical lens of something called self-determination theory, which has had 1.8 million citations. The world's most cited psychologist has been driving that worldwide research piece for 30, 40 years. And it talks about basic psychological needs, the 3 feelings that have to be in place for people to be able to flourish and engage and to change their levels of motivation, right? And those three things are autonomy, being done with, not at, having a sense of choice. The second one is competence, having something to contribute. And the third one is relatedness, feeling seen by other people, having a sense of community. With that in mind, if we understand what we're looking at to improve well-being, and we're already measuring well-being and seeing that we're massively statistically significant, like what's in the qualitative data that can also demonstrate that? And it's these three things. It's autonomy, competence, and relatedness. How do we get at them? Through generative AI. What we've built, and this is now live and working within Noise Solutions platform. These video reflections that happen within every session, if we have consent from the participant, and it's an opt-in option, then each of those video reflections, we take that video, automatically transcribe it, identify the roles of who's in it, the musician or the participant, anonymize the data, tokenize it, so remove it from the record, but give it a token. That means we can stitch it back together later. And then once we've got that anonymized, tokenized data, that is then analyzed by OpenAI, looking for autonomy, competence, relatedness within those reflection videos. And this all happens once a night. Once it's been analyzed, what that prompt is actually looking for is not just, did they talk about these things? What we're able to pull out of that data is quotes. The most important thing, or the most highly ranked thing, if you like, around autonomy or competence or relatedness. So we can pull out discrete quotes of people saying, this made me feel amazing because I did this or I did that, right? Or it felt great because I chose to do this. Or I had an amazing conversation with my mum or my aunt and they told me how brilliant the thing was that I'd done. Autonomy, competence, relatedness. You're collecting those discrete quotes that are so important for grant applications or commissioning contracts, whatever. But also, as importantly, because we're doing it over time, we can then start to track those basic psychological needs over time and look at it by demographic, age, gender, geography, contract, dive into any one of those data points, link it up to the well-being data that we collect, overlay areas of deprivation or any other kind of data that we want. But you're talking about having a comprehensive data suite of qualitative, quantitative data that you can react to. And you can only do this because all of this is held within this sort of safe, cloud-based space where everything's reportable and connected. So yeah, that's where we're at. And I think the possibilities of that are mind-blowing. Coming back to that problem of organizations having to collect other people's data for their agendas, right? We're now in a position where pretty much we've built the capture of qualitative and quantitative data into the process. It's in the DNA of the intervention. None of it's tacked on at the end. It's actually happening as part of the process. It's actually having a positive impact. The collection of those stories is having an impact. We're at a point now where we're this close to just being able to automatically report on everything. The UK charity sector spends 15.8 million hours a year reporting to funders. Can you imagine how much work that is? Whereas we're basically there with not only automatic reporting, but a growing corpus body of qualitative conversational data, not feedback data, conversational data, that we can go back and whatever the funder or the commissioner's agendas are, we can go back and we can ask of our data whatever their points of interest are. So automatic reporting, personalized for whatever audience you might be talking about, which is kind of mind-blowing, right?
You're living the dream. It's amazing. You've reached the utopia.
Jazz hands. But that's the idea. So what we're trying to do is get to a point where we can solve this third sector challenge of arts organizations not being valued because they can't demonstrate the outcomes. That's the thing we're struggling with, or have been struggling with, trying to solve. I talked about our ability to capture stories and well-being data, but we've also done a lot of work on social return on investment, what the financial return is. And I say we've done it. Actually, it's been done independently. We have a company here in Cambridge called Costello Medical. They're a massive international data health analysis firm. And they lent us 5 analysts for a year to do an independent investigation on what are the actual savings to families and services of the outcomes from Noise Solutions work. And essentially, at a conservative estimate, it's a £12.50 return, which means a financial savings return in 2024 of 6.46 million. Re-engaging kids with education, diverting away from mental health admission, impacts on NEET status, all of those kind of things. So taking peer-reviewed proxies of costs for situations in young people's lives, and then looking at what Noise Solutions done and totting up that conservative estimate of saving.
And was there anything that surprised you through adopting AI? And do you have any advice for anyone else thinking about using it in their work?
I'll tell you what really surprised me. When ChatGPT first came out, we were like, oh, this is really interesting. What we'll do is we'll anonymize a whole bunch of transcripts, hand done, transcribed 100 videos, anonymized, fed it into ChatGPT and said, can you give me a printout and a score and a report on basic psychological needs within these transcripts and make some graphs, whatever. And it spat out this amazing report. And we were like, oh, this is amazing. Jumping around, high-fiving each other. Amazing. And then the operations manager, Damien, said, and how did you arrive at that? And it said, oh, I didn't have enough data, so I literally made it up. This is where you start to get into the, oh, okay, there are things that we need to do in terms of ethics and understanding of what it can and can't do to put in the fail-safes to make sure that you can trust what it's telling you. And then you start getting into, oh, there are massive biases within these large language models as well that we need to be aware of. And we need to put those fire breaks in and those checks and balances. That's the kind of journey that we've been on at the moment. For instance, I was at the AI Summit last week, and it was like there was a gold rush. And that was the mentality of people. I spent most of my time hanging out in the ethics and sustainability section of that event. Funnily enough, not as well attended, but I saw some amazing things. There was this astonishing project about providing free legal advice to women in Africa who are disproportionately involved in criminal justice systems, and like amazing use cases. But it also then made you aware that large language models only operate in 30 languages. There are 7,000 languages in the world. It is potentially just another hierarchical form of digital colonialism. There's all that kind of ethical stuff that we need to grapple with. The thing that I took away from that conference was something a woman said around anybody who is developing AI processes. What you are actually doing in terms of what you're implementing and what you're doing is creating the DNA of AI going forward. So the more that you put in now, the more likely as things go forward, that stuff's going to be built in. So that was my main takeaway from that event. So for instance, in terms of the bias stuff that we hear a lot about, some LLMs being more biased than others, we're doing a whole bunch of work with some academics around prompt engineering and how we mitigate biases within that. There's all sorts of things that you can proactively do because you're never going to change a large language model. The expense or the access to it is impossible. But I think there are things, really constructive things that we can do to add to that DNA to improve outcomes.
So what are your next steps?
We've set up a sister organization called Transceive that is taking that approach to data analysis and in the process of early adoption of customers to make it available to them. So we're working with Street Soccer Scotland, we're working with victim support organizations, we're working with an LGBTQ+ organization and various others, getting them to a point where we can help them analyze their qualitative data in the same way as well. These conversations that are happening around organizations all the time, they're really useful, rich, important conversations, and then making that as a service for them.
Thank you so much. It's been so interesting chatting to you today, Simon. If people want to know more about Noise Solution or Transceive, where can they go?
So www.noisesolution.org or www.transceive.org, TRANSCEVE. It's a portmanteau of transmit and receive.
Congratulations on your win. It's been fantastic talking to you.
Thank you very much.